Um, I was doing some research on this topic, Tattvamasi. Anyways, it is not a new topic. So it comes as a part of Chandogya Upanishad. Just to set a brief context. So I came to know that it comes as a part of Chandogya Upanishad. And it's a very highly intellectual debates that has gone on this topic for many years, with different philosophers in India interpreting it in different ways. So the context is there will be, I don't know whether you guys know the context, Ravi or Samba.
No, Raj.
On this.
No.
Okay. The context is there was a sage called Uddalaka, and he sends. At that point of time, it was very common to send your child to Gurukula, right? So his son name is Shvetaketu. So he sends his son Shvetaketu to Gurukula, and maybe after many years of studying in Gurukula, he comes back to his home. And somehow seeing Shvetaketu and his knowledge and his body language, Uddalaka was not very impressed. He could see a tinge of arrogance in Shvetaketu. Yeah. So addressing Shvetaketu, he says, what is that, son, that by knowing one thing, that you will know everything. So, but Shvetaketu obviously he's beaming with arrogance, is beaming with knowledge, and he starts behaving as if he knows everything. So he says, I don't know this, father. So then he obviously Uddalaka says, didn't your teacher teach you all these things? And Shvetaketu says no, and all these things. And so now it becomes on the responsibility of Uddalaka to tell him what is knowledge, and a person who is known, how should he behave, and all those things. And in this context, he starts off telling this things about who is self, who is Atman, and what's his relationship with God, and how should he behave, and all those things. So in that context, this Chandogya Upanishad, he gives a lot of examples, quoting soul and its relationship to the universal Brahman. Brahman is again Paramatma, what we call. So in that context, this particular Tattvamasi also comes into picture. So Tattvamasi is not one word, but it comes as a part of a verse in Chandogya Upanishad. So the verse goes something like this. If I can quote it in Sanskrit, it's a very nice thing to quote in Sanskrit. That's why I will try to quote that in Sanskrit and then give me the meaning. Let me see how my Sanskrit comes. I've practiced it also. So it says, the correct verse says, Saye Esho Animai Etat Atmayamidam Sarvam. Again, Saye Esho Animai Etat Atmayamidam Sarvam. Tat Satyam Sa Atma Tattvamasi Shvetaketo Iti Bhuya. So in that context, this Tattvamasi word comes into picture, which means to say, Saye Esho Animai. Animai is the subtlest of all the things. So that which is the subtlest of all things, Etat Atmayamidam, the self of all this, Sarvam Tat Satyam, that is the truth. And he says, Sa Atma Tattvamasi, which means to say the subtlest of the all, which is the self, that is the truth of all. Sa Atma, that self, Tattvamasi, is you. So in that context, Tattvamasi comes into picture. Okay, so did you get the context? Or hello?
Yeah. Finally, he's saying that again, you, right?
Yeah. So in that context, so the word that comes precedes Tattvamasi is Sa Atma Tattvamasi Shvetaketo, which means to say the Atma, the self, Tattvamasi. You are that self. So in that context, Tattvamasi word is picked up. So now that's the Upanishad part of it.
Mhm.
So now when why this is such a famous statement, right? This is something also called as Mahakavya. Now, why it is such a famous statement is because different Vedantins have tried to interpret this statement in different ways. Now, we in the spiritual circle, we have heard about starting from Buddha, we have heard about non-dual, Satipatthana, and these things. But there are some other philosophies or some other schools of thoughts which have completely interpreted this Tattvamasi in a different way, which probably also I will going to take up in the next 10 minutes. So the first thing that comes up is the Shankara's interpretation of this Tattvamasi. So Adi Shankara comes from a non-dual school of thought, right? Which means to say it is like this. There's nothing called as self, and there's only one truth or the reality, that is the God or Brahman. So they start off with um, the statement like Brahma Satyam and Jagat Mityam, right? Well, only truth is Brahma, and the world is an appearance of Brahman. So therefore, for Shankaracharya, this statement, Atma Tattvamasi, was a pretty straightforward statement when he says that nothing exists, but the self that you think you are is nothing but the ever uh, ever truth Brahman. So he equates the self to Brahman, which means to say self is not there, or even if it is there, it is not as what it appears to be. It is only an apparent self. It is not the real one. The real one is the the Brahman. So that is the Shankara's interpretation of Tattvamasi statement. So in essence, what he intended to tell is Brahma minus its Maya, because the manifestations that we see is because of the Maya. And Atman minus the avidya. Why the self thinks that he is a doer is because the avidya or the Maya or the illusion part of it. So once you remove this illusion part of it, then both are the same. In fact, in non-dual philosophy, you cannot say both because there is no both. It's Advaita. There is no two, but two only appears. So Shankara interprets Atma Tattvamasi as self is equal to Brahman. So now this is one school of thought. So what happened after Adi Shankaracharya? In fact, he didn't make Dvaita. It was just a commentary on all these Upanishads, Brahma Sutras, and Vedas. So primarily, Indian school of thought comes with the Vedas, the Upanishads, the Vedantas. Upanishads are basically Vedantas, and Brahma Sutras, Bhagavad Gita. So Brahma Sutra being the pretty interesting part of all these philosophers have attempted to write a commentary on Brahma Sutras, and in that context, Shankara's commentary is called Shankara Bhashya. Very clearly brings out this non-dual thought that the self is an illusion, and only because of ignorance, the self thinks is different from the others. But in reality, only Brahman is the real thing, and self is just because of avidya. So after Shankara, we could also see some of the other theories that comes up in Indian context. Primarily, I would touch upon Ramanuja and Madhvacharya, and there were others like Nimbaraka and Vallabha and Chaitanya from Bengal, and all this in a way they differ from Shankara's school of thought, and they, in one way or the other, they propagate the dualistic nature of the universe.
Dvaita.
So Dvaita, basically. So among them, the strongest proponent of the dual philosophy is Madhvacharya's Dvaita. So where he brings about the fact that um, the self and the God are different, and you need not have an exclusive theory for it. Our day-to-day experiences tells that I am, and I experience myself, and the experiences are real, and therefore you need not really prove that you exist. It is by day-to-day experience that you exist, and therefore that is real. So he takes that as demonstrated as a biological law, and therefore he says it's not an illusion that you exist. So it is real. It's the reality that you and I exist. So he brings about a dualistic part of existence, where he says there are two kinds of reality. One is the independent reality, which is God, which means independent is swatantra. That means he can do anything, anytime, and unquestionable. So which also Shankara sort of agrees, right? So he says Brahma Satyam. So in this case also, there's agreement that Brahman being the reality and being the Swatantra, which means to say he's the only thing that needs to be known. And Madhvacharya brings about other thing which is called dependent reality. So he doesn't say that as individual selves, we are independent, we are real, but we are not independent. In a way, we are dependent on the independent reality, which is the God. So the God being infinite, having infinite, all the spiritual qualities, is the only independent reality and is free from all the imperfections, whereas we as individual selves are dependent on God for each and everything. So that is where he says, although we are real, but we are not sort of independent, right? And we are dependent on God, and that dependence is something which we need not be ashamed of. That is what he claims. By nature, the selves, we are dependent on God, and that is where the bhakti yoga comes from. All these philosophers like Ramanuja and Madhvacharya and all those things, because the only way they say that we can get rid of what we call moksha or mukti, only way we can get that is through constant singing of or constant praising or devotion of God. Is the only way that God can have the grace on us, and he can take us to the liberation part. So in this way, Madhvacharya brings about his dualistic philosophy. Now, for him, when he looks at the statements Atma Tattvamasi, it becomes difficult for him to explain it, because the verse clearly says Atma Tattvamasi, right? So it is very clear that self, you are that. So and then when the self is different from the Brahman, how does he interpret it? It is quite interesting. And that is where I also said that this is a highly intellectual debate also, because the philosophers at that time not only had the knowledge about, not only had knowledge of Brahma Sutras, but had an excellent knowledge on Sanskrit as well. So there was a lot of linguistic plays that happens in this sort of interpretation of this statements in Brahma Sutras by all three. In fact, many of them in Shankara, Madhva, and Ramanuja all brings in a lot of grammatical angle to it. For example, Ramanuja clearly questions Shankaras and says, when you have to compare two things, the two things must be similar. Now, if you say Atma is the self and Tat is the Brahman, then they are not identical at all. One is Brahma is encompassing everything, but Atman is only a finite being. So then how can this to be compared? So this is illogical. The comparison itself is illogical, because to compare you need two equal things. So in that sense, Ramanuja straight away rejects this comparison of Shankara and says you cannot compare two dissimilar things. And even Madhvacharya brings about an interesting point here. When first of all, he says, he brings out the context and he says, now Shvetaketu is an arrogant son who is beaming with knowledge, and Uddalaka, he's trying to address his arrogance. And so a father who is trying to address the arrogance of a son, will he ever make the statement that, oh son, you are the God? And if he makes that statement, will the arrogance come down? So it seems to be illogical, is the first statement that Madhvacharya makes. So in that context, he says, so that self cannot be equated to the God, because if Uddalaka was doing it, then he would only be increasing the arrogance of the son. So he brings in the interesting grammatical things, which says, Sa Atma Tattvamasi. He says that in Sanskrit, it is possible to interpret this statement as Sa Atma Atatvamasi. So he introduces a word called a here. And again, I do not know the Sanskrit dialectics, but whatever I have read, they say that it is possible to do it in Sanskrit grammar, it seems. So now he interprets as Sa Atma Atatvamasi, which means to say the self, Tat means you are not that. That is what Madhvacharya interprets. So if you look at Dvaita philosophy from Madhvacharya and all his other people who came after that, they cling on to that statement of Sa Atma Atatvamasi, which means to say, O self, you are not that, but you're always a servant of God. So that is a very interesting interpretation I saw from Madhvacharya. And he not only brings in that particular change, but he quotes several of the instances in Chandogya Upanishad where Uddalaka seems to be saying his son by giving different examples. For example, first statement he says is Uddalaka tells his son, take a water, put salt into it, and come after some hours and see what has happened. So first he gives the water and he says, ask Shvetake to drink the water. He says it's pure water. Now he asks him to put some salt into it. After some hours, he again asks Shvetake to drink the water. So he says it's salty now. So the way Shankara interprets is this, that like now when the salt dissolves in water, similarly, God permeates through all the jivas, and there is nothing called salt here. It's only water. So that means the universal truth is only Brahman. The way Madhva interprets this, you can clearly see that there's a difference between first where there was no salt and where there is salt, right? In that sense, although this not visible, salt is not visible, the essence of salt is seen, which means there's water as well as salt. In that way, God permeates through all of us and he acts through us. So he brings a dualistic interpretations there. So in every example like this, other example they give is the bird which is tied to a pole. So when the bird is tied to a pole, it goes all around the pole trying in a bit to escape from it. But after many attempts, it gives up its effort and it comes and rests near the pole. So the way again Shankara interprets is that the Atman, the self, because of our ignorance, we think that we are the doers and we can do things and we try to do a lot of things, but we get dissatisfied at the end of the day and come and rest in ourselves, which is the true essence, which is the Brahman. Whereas Madhvacharya interprets it again different. There's a pole, there's a bird. There are two different things, and the bird, that is a self, tries a lot of things because he again thinks that he's a doer, but finally he comes and seeks the Sharan or seeks the blessings of God and sits near the God. So he again brings the distinctions here. So this is how it goes in all the examples that is cited in the Upanishad. The different people have put in different interpretations of it. So just to summarize different interpretations, both Ramanuja and Madhvacharya, they do not rule out that self is different, self is real. Madhvacharya being more profound in that. The experience that we have is real. We are separate from God. And the interesting point comes about when we are separate, do we have the free will to do things? That's the point that comes up. So if you take about non-dualistic Advaita philosophy, there's no question of that, because when there is no self and self itself is a maya or illusion, so what they call kartritva or the doership doesn't come in that picture at all. But in Madhva, Dvaita philosophy, there's some amount of kartritva assigned to the self because there's a real self. He's an agent also. He's a doer agent. But again, he's bound by God. He's not independent in every way. So they bring in a thought about the self is free to do, but the outcomes depends on the nature of the self, the past actions, and the grace of God. So these three things becomes important for any outcomes to happen. So which means to say, and also he brings up an important point that by nature, self has certain attributes. And if I remember, the attributes are, I think it is Icha and Prayatna, which means to say the desire and the effort These are the inbuilt qualities of self, which means to say your the self nature is to attempt, is to try, do prayatna and to desire. So that doesn't mean that he can do each and everything. Only if there is a grace of God and his past karmas enable him to move forward, then he can move forward. So that is the interpretation of Madhva, which means to say you have to build in good karmas. And how do we build in good karmas? So interpretation of Madhvacharya here is you have to always lead a life in accordance is what is prescribed in Vedas. Like, you have to be truthful, you have to follow the dharma, you have to be always be praising the Lord and those kind of things. This accumulates good karma, and anything that you do apart from this will accumulate bad karma for you. So depending on the karma, depending on the grace of God, you will take steps. God will take you forward towards the path of liberation. But in Shankara's philosophy, the moment the ignorance drops off, that I am not the individual self, I am that Brahman already. Then because that is the one that is preventing us from knowing the ultimate reality. The moment it drops off, then you are there. Right. So that is where in that non-dual philosophy, it is more of I saw more of a jnana, and in Madhva's philosophy, it is more of and so subsequent philosophy, it is more of bhakti, because you need to have grace of God to be taken forward. Although the self has some amount of free will, but not completely. So in that sense, the interpretation of Tattvamasi also differs from philosophies to philosophies, and then it's a highly, as I said, highly intellectual debates that I saw in many, in some videos and in some texts as well. One is about a knowledge. The second is also about a language dialectics. So you need to have profound knowledge of Sanskrit also, that how different people interprets this. Little bit on Vishishtadvaita, Ramanujacharya, because I haven't read that too deeply, but whatever I could read it, they also say that the self and the Brahman are not one, they are different. But why is it called qualified Advaita is because Ramanuja perceives this world or this existence as a body which has Chit and Achit, and the God to be the soul of this. So in a way, he says that the God exists as soul in each one of us, and the manifestation of the God can happen only through us. So in that sense, he sees this existence as a body and God as a soul of this existence. So in that sense, it becomes a qualified Advaita. So, but he says he accepts that that they are real, but they cannot exist without the God. In Dvaita, there is no unity at all between Jiva and Paramatma. The Paramatma can exist without the Jiva also, right? This is the important distinction that Madhva brings in. But why he creates this universe, you can't question him, because he's so independent, you can't question him. The moment he becomes answerable, he's not independent. That is the interpretation of Madhva brings in. So this is the context, this is the brief learning that I had for the past 1 week, which I wanted to share. Was I clear in some aspects?
Yeah, actually, all these days, there are three schools of thought. I was also confused a lot. Today, a lot of clarity came in. See, first it started with Dvaita, then Advaita, then Vishishtadvaita. When, according to the chronology, at least the schools of thought were like this, is what
chronology. Vijay,
first Advaita, is it?
Yeah, first is Shankara.
Okay,
Advaita.
then that is Advaita. Okay.
Then second is Vishishtadvaita, which is Ramanuja, and third is Dvaita. So again, these people did not want to bring in this thoughts. Okay. For any Indian philosopher, one of the important texts to be commented is the Brahma Sutra. So these were the commentaries of Brahma Sutra, and later it became a sort of sect on its own, or a caste on its own, or something like that.
Okay. Now I can relate. Even the latest is Dvaita, means that is why people are separating themselves from God and trying to please God by praying and all. Okay.
Yes, yes. Because in that philosophy, the only way that you can achieve moksha, liberation, but there are similarities. They all agree that the Brahman is independent, no question about it. And they also agree that there is an ignorance, there is avidya. But Shankara says avidya has to be removed. But Madhva says you can't remove it. Avidya is there. Avidya is also real. Illusion is also real. You can't remove it. Only with the grace of God that goes off.
Understand. Okay, got it. So first one, Advaita says there is no Jivatma, Paramatma separate.
Yes.
Vishishtadvaita says they are both are there, but the realization of each other cannot happen in single. So duality will exist, but one is dependent on the other, something like that.
Correct.
And in Dvaita it says both are different, and God, the presence of God is Brahman is supreme, and he must exist, and the Jivatma need not exist for Paramatma to exist.
Correct. And if you want to have liberation, you need to have the grace of God.
Grace of, got it. Great.
And Rajiv, when someone, I think Madhvachar, I think he says that you cannot compare with the two unequals. Even if that is the case, we take even in the in Dvaita I'm talking about, even in Atma Paramatma, if there are two things in Atma also, again there are a lot of unequals, right?
Correct. That is the
So
very
so
important.
so it is more than, then it is more than two.
Yeah. I mean, if I looked at Madhva and but I recorded that. That's a very important point he bring in. He brings in 5 differences. Okay. Let me pull that out. He brings in 5 differences. So he says not only there is a difference between God and self. He says there's a difference between God and self. There's a difference between self and self.
Mm.
Which means he says that no self is identical to other self.
Mm.
He brings out a difference between God and matter. And he says God and matter are different. Self and matter are different. And also different materials. Matter and matter is different. And then he calls it Panchabeda. Five-fold difference. So in a way, what I read out of Madhva, it appears to how we actually go about our world today. In our world today, also, each one of us feels we are different from the other, and that is how we are treated also in family, in school, in office. Correct. I don't think we are treated equally. So there is a difference between selves and action. Yeah. So in that sense, probably essentially what I felt is what we are following today in today's world is the dualistic thoughts.
Okay. Ravi, I muted you because that time some noise was coming from your side. You can, yeah.
Yeah, I saw I was on mute. I was just listening. That's all.
Um, so for me, I mean, after even hearing Rajiv, uh, more reasonable looks like Advaita for me. It need not be for all of us or many of us. Um, because again in the self there are differences. Each self is not again looks same, and even in the self also human being looks different, are things different, and other like bird, one example you said bird also, so that is different, and their way of doing things different. If you start seeing differences, there need not be just dvaita, there can be multiple things. So but if you see Atma thing, it's one actually. If that is one, that should be even Paramatma is same, not different, as per my understanding.
More than the differences, the Advaita tells about the realization of the self, which should
Mm.
be as equal to as that Paramatma.
Paramatma.
Then Jivatma can do good things and then realize, and then manifestation can be very at a very high level. So I think that is the essence of Advaita. I mean, at least that is how I.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of debates on these things. So what I felt is after there's so many debates that's gone on for many centuries. But what interesting that I got out of this is I came across these three words like Shravana, Manana, and Nididhyasa, right? So when you're in Shravana stage, we hear all of these things like what we have been hearing in this spiritual side of it. And the second important jump that we got to make is on the Manana side, where the churning happens of all these thoughts, and we get to know what I don't know what to call what works for us or what is a sweet spot for us and what is that we can connect to easily. I think there was an interesting thing when I was hearing J. Jiddu Krishnamurti. So when he was giving a lecture in Chennai, he he sees some of the folks sitting in the front of him and he asks them, "You have been coming to my teaching for many years now. I am seeing that my hair was black then, your hair was black then. Now it is both has gone gray. I keep telling the same thing. You keep hearing the same thing, but you still come at 5 o'clock exactly in the evening to listen to me. What is that you have gained out of this?" So that is what Jiddu Krishnamurti asks. So in that sense, the Shravana should turn into Manana, where the churning happens, and then we got to somehow find out what works for us. And then Nididhyasa is like putting that in practice, in everyday practice, and living that. That is where we start realizing what we are. So in that sense, I could see very fierce sort of a debates happening among these theories, primarily because some people firmly believe that this is right, and probably they are leading that way also. If I look at some of the subsequent things written after Shankara or after Madhva or after Ramanuja, I could sense that why people were so fierce in their, because they would have felt that is the right thing and they would have led that way. So otherwise, I think this will be an endless debate, which is not settled. I don't think there'll be one way for truth. In fact, Vivekananda brings it out very nicely. He says all these three things form a part of the ladder, and he was explaining it to one of the gurus, and he says all these three philosophies, Advaita, Dvaita, and Vishishtadvaita, form a ladder, where Dvaita is at the bottom, where you start with that you and God are different, and people are different around you, and then you come to Vishishtadvaita, where there's certain unity, and finally you come to a realization that there's only one reality, which is a Brahman. That is where you go to the top. And he asks his guru for interpretation, and his guru very humorously tells him that, yeah, you're right, but the ladder can also be inverted. So so in that sense, this is very difficult to convince everyone, but we have to find our own reality and move on, is what I felt.
Good. Thanks, Rajeev. Ravi, we want to hear from you.
Yeah.
Nothing. I was just, Rajiv put it in very simple terms. So what was going on in my mind was, finally I'm not seeing much difference in these three. In the sense, finally it is somehow appearing same. When you see, the path may be different, but the destination appears to be same for me. Uh, for example, if 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 you agree that, okay, the Advaita philosophy, where everything is one, then the consequence of that would be acceptance of everything, right? If everything is one, if you and me are same, uh, which comes from the what do you say, Paramatma, or not comes from the Paramatma, we are that, then there is no rejection of anything, right? I don't reject you of any of your things. I accept everything of yours or mine or anything that is happening around. Same way, if you take Dvaita philosophy, where he is the controller, okay, even then we have to accept it, right? Even if somebody else is, there is one super soul who is controlling all these things, still the only, and his grace is everything, then we have to accept everything. That is the second thing. Even in Vishishtadvaita, where say we are part of that, that portion sits in us. even
He's a
then we have to
controller.
accept.
He is the controller.
Yeah, he's a controller. So even in that case, uh, finally, finally the acceptance of everything is the end, is what I feel. If
Yeah,
you reach that state.
one is the
Yeah, go on.
acceptance, and second is also the self that we think that we can do this, we can do that. I think it is also not correct, because in all these three theories, Advaita clearly says there's no self, and Madhva also, although he differentiates the self, but he doesn't give any freedom to that self.
Exactly.
Which means to say that the notion that we have, that we can do this, we can do that, we have to, that our effort is required, all those things are also not there in Madhvacharya. He says, although Jiva,
Exactly.
you are the self, but you have to depend on God. There's
Correct.
nothing you can.
So correct. See, if I cannot, I don't have freedom, and that's why I'm what I am today. Then somebody else whom we see, our problem is very simple. We want something to change. Okay. Mainly we want people to change. These are the common problems, right? We all have. So if
Ravi, one correction. We want others to change, or we want ourselves to change?
mostly we want others to change. That's the
Okay. Please carry on.
yeah, that's the common thing, right? We want, see, we don't see, basically we reject others, in the sense others behavior. See, somebody is corrupt, we don't want them to be corrupt. Somebody is say not ethical, we don't want them to be ethical. Sorry, we don't want them to be unethical. See, none of the places we see ourselves. We think we are all perfect, and I'm perfect, but all of us have to change. Is the common undercurrent what happens in every action, right? So if we accept any of these things, the consequence of this is just accept everything as it is. It's like accepting birth and death both with the equal weightage. So finally we end up in it if we understand any of them right. The problem for us is we choose somewhere, we choose what is in a situation, we choose what is convenient for that situation. In some other situation, we choose something else.
There is no responsibility. I mean, the chooser is not what the chooser doesn't choose. Actually, it is already chosen. That's the point here.
Exactly, I agree. But at that moment, we don't have that mindset.
Yeah, correct.
See, there is a split mindset in us. When we are, say, now we are discussing and we clearly intellectually say that I am not a chooser. When I am not a chooser, then you are also not a chooser. Okay.
Correct.
But tomorrow, when you do something which I don't want, I still take you as a chooser. That's the whole reason my anger comes up or irritation comes up, because I feel you are a chooser. You are not choosing, right? See, that split is what is creating stress in us. If we settle in one thing, I think that's what that's where it goes. But even that settling also, intellectually, if we talk, it has to happen by the grace of God.
Yeah, that is where it probably, yeah, everything comes down to that. Everything comes down to that. It happens. If it has to happen, it will happen.
Exactly.
I think in Sanskrit they call it as tena vina trunamapi na chalati, right? Which means to say without his thing, the grass thing also doesn't move.
Exactly.
So if that gets into our day-to-day living, then probably I think we might end up living peacefully, is what I feel.
Exactly. Accepting everything that is there. Every situation as just something happening. Neither I choose, nor I like, nor I dislike. Just go with the flow. Is finally what it is coming to.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. And also all the three says the same thing.
Yeah, see, the three say the same thing, but what I found afterwards is that there were a lot of debates, not on this sort of a topic, but I was hearing a lot of debates on the grammatical part of it. So that means to say, people who came after, say, Madhvacharya things, they interpreted this text based on their intelligence of some people. I think I was also referring to Raghavendra Swami. He was also a Dvaita follower, right? So he was. It is like too much of a grammar, too much of grammar interpretations. But they finally say, yeah, the essence of it is that um, as a self, your your duty, if you think you have a free will, is to um, put your efforts towards God, towards grace of God. That's the essence that that I could find out in every every teacher who came
True.
after that.
See, true, and also see my inner somehow what I am not able to accept now is I am not able to accept anyone as guru. Okay, I mean I am not able to say okay somebody has said it must be right because if you see say for example I think Ramanujacharya or somebody people try to kill them. Okay, in a sense those days who were debating which means that somebody who was debating with Ramanujacharya should be of same caliber only, right?
Absolutely.
Even though the belief is different. And such people are trying to kill each other. Uh, and then I don't know whether they are somewhere or it is just their intellectual power and their leadership quality is just high and people are just following them. Even if you look modern gurus, they're doing everything. Everything. I mean, they are enjoying everything, but there are thousands of followers. So we don't know whether somebody who has been recognized as okay, great guru should be really seen as a guru, or anybody around us. Okay, and maybe we treat somebody sitting in watchman who is in my apartment. Maybe if you observe them, they are much better than. I mean, they are displaying the actual behavior.
Yeah.
They may be right. So we should somehow that acceptance of a guru has not come to me yet. That's why I keep rejecting everything. What do you say? Either out of irritation or something. That's where I'm not able to stick to one philosophy or one teacher who gave that philosophy.
Yeah.
And if you look at the fights that has happened, it's too much.
It's too much. Yeah.
People poisoned each other, and even if you see Ramanujacharya, he came to Melukote because people tried to kill him somewhere else. I think Srirangam they tried to kill him, right? So
Yeah.
he came to Melukote. So finally, after preaching all those things, the actions that they were doing is to this level, which I don't even do it today. Right? Which is they're more better than me.
Ravi, were they literally plan to kill them? Kill him?
Yeah, literally kill.
There are some notes that tells that yes, there were attempts made.
Oh.
That is
Yeah,
because see the politics comes in, right, Samba. Once you say that okay, Shankara is my guru, and the followers of the followers of these gurus are the problem, right? So now they would have established a school of thought, and they would have been now somebody comes in and says, do this. Now there's a resistance is so much. There's so much at stake now, right? Whatever I have built over a period of time is now shaking. So I have to. It's my. So I don't think the followers will have the same caliber as what probably Shankara taught or Ramanuja taught or something like that. The problem is the followers, in my opinion.
There is also historically one more, impact of this. See, once because of King Ashoka, lot of Buddhism was there in India. Then Adi Shankara came. Then when he became popular, Shaivism became popular.
Correct. Shaivism.
After that, Madhvacharya, these people came. Now Shaivism is less and Vaishnavism is more.
Vaishnavism become popular. Correct.
So I mean, there are parallel tracks happening to the impact on society. Also, can we correlate both? Because when one guru becomes so popular, what he teaches also becomes popular in the popular what you call society.
True, but if you look at them, they only said they only talked about Brahman. They never spoke about. I think they never spoke about Shaivism or Vaishnavism, right? So again, maybe Madhvacharya brought in the word Vishnu because he was referring to Brahman as the Vishnu, which means whatever is that Swatantra independent reality is there. That is what he called as Vishnu.
Correct. No, I am referring to the coterie behind the guru who spread this.
Correct.
See, that is one thing, and also it is not a person for them they fought, right? It is a concept for them they fought.
Yeah.
Okay. In a sense, I'm telling even concept, their belief is what they fought for. Even if you look at, say, Shankaracharya's, what is said, I don't know. See, all these are skewed history, but still, what we can read is even Shankaracharya followers, they threw many of the Buddhist follows out of this place, whatever it is, through physical abuse. So they send them out forcefully, and that's how it is there. And also, how people carry that act is same act can be seen as positive or same act can be seen as negative. Somehow that was seen as a positive thing, that he uphold the upheld our culture. Okay.
Belief system. Yeah.
But the means in which they did was all those things, right? This hitting them, blah blah blah, all those things. They did, but they never came together. If they had come together and spread the purpose, I think we would have gone with the purpose rather than the practices.
Yes.
Somehow, even today, if you see, we are all stuck in practice. Somehow, we are stuck in practices, right? And names and beliefs and all those things. But did anyone reach what was the ultimate purpose of it? None. And somehow we need to look for that thing. That essence is what is the only way to, I think, move and grow.
Coming
And
back
I see
to our
all of them are
subject,
saying same thing.
Yeah.
That's what I gave a long answer for
in that doing agile thing rather than being agile in the mindset.
Exactly.
Well said, Vijay.
And not fight agile versus waterfall.
Exactly.
Shall I stop the recording or shall I
Yeah.
continue?
No,
Yeah,
it's
I'll
okay.
stop it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you can. Yeah.